Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin chapter 22 of Left Behind. The chapter begins with more of the author's stupidity. Buck has trouble sleeping because his mind is racing with various thoughts. He starts off thinking about how excited he is to surprise Chloe on the plane tomorrow. His thoughts shift to the explanation Rayford gave him about the disappearances and the Bible. Here the authors use Buck to make a very foolish and fallacious argument. It gets stated that if one part of the Bible is true, then the whole thing is true. This is false because regardless if one or multiple parts are true to some degree, it does not mean that everything is true. Each part must be weighed and examined based on evidence proving what parts can be verified as true. The same is true in reverse. Because one part is wrong, it does not mean that the whole thing is wrong. An example that other atheists have made is, there is a comic book series on Spider-Man. The comic mentions that he lives and protects New York City. Because New York City is a real place, it does not mean that Spider-Man is real. So even though the comic got one part right, does not mean everything in the comic is correct. The same for the Bible. There are parts that the Bible gets right, like places and names, but then there are other things like events and prophecies that the Bible gets wrong. The failed prophecy of Tyre never being lived in after Nebuchadnezzar destroys it, but he was never able to defeat them. The Nile River drying up, which never happened. All these are things the Bible gets wrong. Does that mean that the Bible is fully wrong? No, it does not. That would be a non sequitur. Buck acts incredulously because he cannot understand why this never made sense to him before. This can be easily accomplished depending on how it is looked at. One way is that because he likes Chloe and she admits that she agrees with her father's theory, then he'll agree to get on her good side. This was all things he was exposed to before but never really took seriously or paid attention to. He was not convinced at the time, but as he already stated, this time he wanted to believe. It may very well be because of Chloe wanting to impress her. It would not be the first time someone pretended to believe in something in order to get into the other person's pants. Sadly, for all his bragging, as well as Rayford's bragging as well. They are very gullible people. Rather than using rational and reason, they just believe because they think it will get the interest from others. Buck reflects on the night of the attack and cannot understand how it could have happened if God had not done it. I'm reminded of the movie Clue, where the character of Colonel Mustard described himself as a war profiteer. He stole radios and other items from governmental planes and sold them for high profits. The movie then goes on to say that numerous airmen had lost their lives because vital parts were missing from the planes they flew. Although that was a movie, the concept could be a reasonable explanation as to why the Russian planes crashed into each other as they malfunctioned. Buck described a decline in resources for the Russians and they wanted to attack Israel to steal the fertilizer so they could better their situation. One option could be the same thing, that parts had been sold to make money and what was left were junk parts that malfunctioned. If you allow for confirmation bias, then the event would appear as if a god intervened. However, that also means ignoring other possibilities that follow a more mundane reason for the event. This is mentioned because Buck concludes that the only explanation for this is that it was supernaturally inspired. Even as a reporter, he should know better. If Buck was half a good reporter, as he thinks himself to be, he would not be jumping to conclusions without all the facts. Ignoring all other possibilities should also be avoided. Buck descends into a rant of self-loathing as he realizes that he should have believed in God sooner. He does not want to pray to God, but after remembering that Rayford had mentioned a pastor named Bruce, so he wants to talk to him to learn more about what it means to be born again. He wants to convert but feels he needs to discuss it more before he decides. Buck thinks about how he thought that because he thinks he is a good person that his good deeds would have saved him. Scene changes to Rayford as he feels like a failure because no one was convinced by his bullshit arguments. His ego is running rampant again as he believes that God gave him the right words to say, and he can't understand why Chloe and Hattie were not gullible enough to fall for it. He believes his motives were pure, but he's an ass for thinking that even matters. He presented no evidence that anything he said was true. A post seen on Facebook sums things up perfectly. If you are trying to prove that God exists, there are two important things to remember. First, reading the Bible is not valid research. Second, I feel him in my heart is not valid data. Remembering that causation has no correlation in regards to Rayford's sincerity. Let's explain. Because topic A is true does not mean it has any effect on topic B. In this case, again, because Rayford considers his self-serving motives to be sincere, it does not prove that his religious beliefs are true or should be followed. Rayford finally realizes that his sincerity did not convince Hattie, but he falls into a false dichotomy. He believes that because he told her what he believes, that Hattie either thinks what he believes is bogus or that she is trying to deny the truth. They try to paint an all-or-nothing scenario when Hattie could only be partially convinced and does not want to accept something that is not 100% true. Rayford is convinced that Buck thought he was a lunatic and Chloe apologized for his insane ramblings. The self-pity is a major turn-off, so let's skip ahead past the nonsense. Scene changes to Buck as he waits until everyone else enters the plane before he boards. Chloe looks out the window as Buck sits next to her and she seems unaware that he is there. She finally notices him and the story gets stupid again. Chloe mentions some nonsense that she prayed to God and Buck sitting next to her was the answer to that prayer. She says she was moved by her father's story and because he seemed so sincere, said by no atheist or skeptic ever, that she was moved into believing it. She admits that she is completely convinced because of the emotion of her father. Not by evidence, like a rational person would. But by feelings. You know, the same feelings that can be wrong. Like when couples think they are in love because of feelings and then later fall out of love because their feelings change. Buck admits he's going through the same thing, which really shows how gullible Christians are because they build their foundations on sand, and when the storm comes and the flood waters rise over their heads as they drown, they resort to still believing rather than jump in the lifeboat of reason. Chloe comes to the conclusion that if God is real and everything in the Bible is true, then he would not hide himself from someone seeking. Odd considering how many atheists asked God to prove to them that he exists and he never has. The fact is, if God existed and he wants a relationship with us, he would not be playing hide and seek but show himself in a way that leaves no doubt to his existence. Originally Chloe started out as a strong, well-reasoned, rational character, but her psyche has been progressively slipping so that she has become a bumbling idiot. Very sad that the authors portrayed her this way. It's a good example of the Christian bias towards women. Chloe reveals that she prayed to have God show her that he cares, and somehow Buck sitting next to her on the plane was supposed to be the answer to that prayer? That makes no sense. Another non sequitur. Buck refuses to convert until he speaks to Bruce, so Chloe calls her father and they sit alone as he converts her to his religion. So Christianity must be based on something, but not sure why they base it on fallacies. Christians seem to think fallacies are virtues. This ends chapter 22 of Left Behind. See you next time for chapter 23.